I'd like to welcome everybody to our February Conservancy Day. We're very happy you can join us. I am Ann Boucher, the Education Coordinator for the Friends. The Friends have been sponsoring these presentations 11 out of 12 months a year for more than 10 years. We're thrilled today to have Rob Schubert, the land manager for the Conservancy, presenting. Before we start, I have a few comments and some technical issues to mention. The Friends are celebrating their 25th anniversary plus 1 year this year. It was last year, but with COVID, lots of activities were postponed until this year. Please keep an eye on our website and our Facebook page for celebration events, and we would love to have you join us. We are also undertaking an ambitious campaign to raise $100,000 to create a platinum prairie at the new acre parcel addition to the Conservancy. We're doing this in partnership with Dane County and I believe Clean Lakes Alliance. Please consider donating to that effort. Also, please consider joining the Friends. Among other things, we advocate for the watershed, conduct education and outreach activities, and have a major role in the restoration and management of Conservancy lands. Conservancy Days are held the third Thursday of the month from January to November each year. In January this year, we had a great talk on the Dane County Climate Action Plan. If you want to watch that and any of our other recorded Conservancy Days, which go back as far as last September, you can go to our YouTube channel, the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy YouTube channel, and those recordings are there. I wanted to let you know about our upcoming topics. You can see we're going to have, we have newly installed kestrel boxes in the Conservancy, and a representative from Madison Audubon, Patrick Reddy, is going to come and talk about the kestrel box program across central Wisconsin and the importance of it. In April, we have 2 master naturalists trained at Pheasant Branch who have been undertaking a survey of the ground nesting birds in the northern part of the Conservancy. They have lots of data to present. It's going to be interesting. It's very interesting to see what they have discovered over their last 2 years of monitoring. In May, we're going to have a talk on phenology, and phenology specific to the Conservancy. The author of When Things Happen, Randy Hoffman, will be our presenter. I'm looking for topic ideas for June through October. We typically plan about 5 or 6 months ahead of time. So we're right now actively looking for presentations over the summer and fall. Not sure if they're going to be live or virtual or some combination. But in November of the year, we're going to talk about the Saltwise campaign that is supported by the Friends and run through Dane County, and Allison Madison will be the speaker for that. Now I have to really say I appreciate your patience with me as I work with this technology. We were hopeful that Facebook and YouTube would be one of our go-to ways to do these talks, but Facebook has its impediments. It's tough to get into it if you don't have an account. I thought streaming to YouTube might be the answer. This is all just beyond a regular Zoom meeting. I was hoping to reach more people through Facebook or YouTube. But here with YouTube, if you don't have a Google account or a YouTube account, you cannot use the chat box, which is where I would like everybody to put their comments and questions, please. So if you're stuck and you don't have a Google account, I'm supplying you here with the Zoom login account, and you are welcome to log into this meeting in Zoom. You don't need an account. You just select join a meeting from the zoom.us page, and there's our meeting ID and our password. And I am going to try to put that information into the live chat that now has 21 people in it. but if everybody wants to take a minute and jot down the meeting ID and the password, then I will, you can hopefully leave YouTube and log in that way. If you choose to log in that way, I'd like you to please, because if you log into Zoom, then you can use the chat function there to supply comments and questions. I am going to be monitoring them both. I will try to sort of collect them until Rob's done with his presentation, and then try to get all of his comments and questions, all of your comments and questions to him. But please, if you join the Zoom meeting, stay muted. It also helps if you turn off your video feed and put your comments and questions in the chat area. And we have one person taking advantage of that. I'm gonna mute her. And there. So I'm gonna do my best. With that, I would like to turn this meeting over now to Rob Schubert. Oops, I guess I had one more slide, but it doesn't matter. Rob has been the land manager at the Conservancy for the past 3 years, I believe. He brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to his role. I'll let him introduce himself. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Rob, you're in control.
Well, thank you, Ann, for the introduction. Again, my name is Rob Schubert. I am I'm the land manager for the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy. I've been in this role since 2018, so I'm looking forward to coming into my 5th season now, and really excited about all the work and everything that's out there. So I was asked to put together this presentation on prairies, and I originally conceptualized it as being much broader topic than what it's going to be tonight, because I realized how brief an opportunity 45 minutes actually provides. So basically, I'm just going to be giving a broad overview of historic prairies in Wisconsin. So prairies develop under, broadly speaking, 3 different factors. So we have the climate, and with prairies, it's essentially how much rain falls. So in climates where there's not a lot of rainfall, that really does not promote forest development. So it really tends to promote more open grasslands. Adaptive conditions are essentially our soil condition. We have really dry and well-drained soils. That's also not really going to be very conducive to woody plant growth, and is going to promote more open grassland. And then our cultural, which in Wisconsin is hugely important to our prairies, because many of our prairies would not survive without our human activity. So in this photo here, you can see kind of all these kind of factors. So obviously in Wisconsin, we have our climate is conducive to forest development.
Rob, we're not seeing your screen. We're seeing you chatting. There you go.
Okay.
Well done. That's it.
So is everyone seeing this now? Ann?
I believe so. I've got a little bit of a lag, and it should be coming up in a minute, and then I can make sure. Yep. Yeah. You're there. You're on.
Awesome. So sorry about that, folks. So as I was saying, kind of the 3 main factors that contribute to prairie development are the climate, the soils, and then the human activities. So in this picture, you can see that the combination of kind of the soils on this dry bluff prairie, and then also the human activities. So in this particular picture, you can see that there are human beings doing prescribed fire, and there's also was a lot of tree and shrub removal that went into that previously to maintain this as an open prairie. So historically in Wisconsin, there were broadly 6 types of prairie. And these communities, there's nothing necessarily distinct about them. They're all just based on their particular assemblages of plants. And so they tend to grade into one another. So it's not always distinct where, say, a wet prairie ends and a wet mesic prairie begins, but rather they existed in these much larger complexes where all different kinds of plant communities were grading into each other. Sand prairies, like the name suggests, they occur on excessively drained soils with high mineral content. Locally, they're found pretty commonly along the Wisconsin River. That's where this particular photo was taken, and where we had a lot of sand deposition from the river, these sand prairies occurred. They're often fairly intact because of the poor soil fertility. They weren't really extensively used for agriculture, so they weren't heavily grazed, and they weren't ever really row cropped historically. So they're often fairly intact, and they support many interesting species. And I say that not that other prairies don't, but because our sand prairies tend to be fairly intact, they'll have species that you wouldn't otherwise see in other plant communities. One of those being sandcress or Arabidopsis lyrata. So this is a very short-lived plant, and it needs a lot of bare soil area to reproduce. So we'll find this on sand prairies and our bluff prairies, but also we'll find this on vertical rock ledges in the Baraboo Range, where it's able to actually grow within the moss layering of the rock. Another one is blue toad flax. And again, this is a very short-statured, fairly short-lived species. And you can see in the photo that it has these really distinct hairs along the stem. And that's pretty common of plants growing in dry areas because it really protects them from the drought conditions that occur there. And I had to have at least one sedge in here. So this is the aptly named sand sedge. And you never really see these outside of natural plant communities. And this is one of the few members of the sedge family that actually was able to kind of get out of the wetland and move into upland areas. So in that, it is also fairly interesting. Bluff prairies, these are some of our most iconic prairies. And these occur generally on steep southwestern slopes. They're most common in the driftless area because that's where that steep topography occurs. They're often small and very isolated. So historically, they would have occurred along these kind of ridges. In modern times, they've really become isolated. So you can see there are some people working on removing cedars off this prairie in the foreground. And you see a similar kind of small isolated prairie in the background. The harsh growing conditions, so the poor soil conditions, the steepness, that contributes to very dry conditions, and the southwest facing aspect, it's getting a lot of solar radiation, really makes it difficult for most trees and shrubs to establish on here. However, the red cedars have really taken over a lot of these and are really beginning to encroach and really extirpate a lot of these small bluff prairie remnants. So they are currently at a high risk of loss, unfortunately. Some of the bluff prairie flora is very similar to the dry prairie flora. Again, we have plants that are really well suited to very harsh and dry growing conditions. So they often are very short statured because they don't need to invest a lot of energy into height and for competition. So the blue-eyed grass, pretty characteristic of bluff prairies. Here's Pheasant Branch Conservancy, actually. This is one of our little bluff prairies with the iconic past flower in the foreground. And the aptly named prairie violet, again, occurs in both the bluff and the dry prairies. Dry mesic prairies are historically fairly common in southern Wisconsin, sharing many of the features with the dry prairies. These are incredibly rare because they had a little bit more fertile soil, and so they were much more readily converted for agricultural use. Mesic prairie, this is kind of the classic tall grass prairie. This is where we begin to see a lot of those taller prairie grasses like the Indian grass and the big blue stem, and a lot of the tall showy wildflowers, like you can see the blazing star and the gray-headed coneflower in this picture. And these are pretty much gone. Less than 100 acres of an estimated 800,000 that historically occurred are left. And the rich soil that developed under these prairies with the just massively deep roots were just really coveted for agriculture. So these pretty much all just went under the plow and were lost. Wet mesic prairies, these are grass dominated plant communities. So that's what kind of separates them from the wetlands and sedge meadows and such. They often occurred within larger wetland complexes. So these would have been kind of maybe more dry inclusions in large kind of sedge meadow and shrub car environments. And again, these are also very rare because they had very fertile soil. They were very easy to drain and convert to row crop agriculture. Wet prairies, again, are almost all gone for those same reasons. A very fertile soil, very easily drained and converted. As I've kind of touched on, most of the former Wisconsin prairie communities have been lost, and this has been due to farming, grazing, development, and an absence of fire. So most of our remnant prairies, kind of the existing scraps of the once much larger prairies, are very isolated, very small, and really prone to being lost within the next coming decades if nothing is done to protect them. So prescribed fire is hugely important, both currently and historically. Fire was the main driver of prairies. We have the climate that supports forests in Wisconsin. So without active human use of putting fire on the land to maintain open landscapes, these are prairies, our savannas, and a lot of our other open habitats would not exist. So the fire is absolutely key. We know that without fire, prairies are lost. You have to think it's been less than 200 years since Europeans kind of took over Wisconsin, and within that time, our state has drastically changed, and our native plant communities and have for the most part been lost. So the timing and the season of fire is hugely important. That really affects the results of the fire and what happens. Frequency of fire is also very important. So broadly speaking, and with fire, there's two really seasons that we can talk about, and those are being the dormant seasons. So those are fires that generally occur in late winter or early spring. Most of the plants and the animals are dormant, so they're not active. And then we have the growing season, which typically is between late summer through early fall. And within this time, many plants are still growing, and many plants and insects are also still active. So here's an early dormant season burn. This occurred on a bluff prairie along the Mississippi River. You can see in the background, there's still quite a bit of snow on the ground, but because these bluff prairies get so much sunlight, they really warm up much faster than the surrounding areas. So these prairies are often burned fairly early, and that's for a couple of reasons. One being that it's easier to burn because with snow in the surrounding woods, you don't really need to worry about the fire escaping and becoming beyond your control. And also it's because these often support a lot of critical or species of concern, such as our eastern timber rattlesnake. So where you're burning, where you have sensitive species, you need to that needs to be taken into effect. And so these burns typically occur in late February or early March before these species emerge and would be negatively impacted by fire. So there's a misspelling. There's a late dormant season to early growing season burn. That's when most fires occur. So this is kind of, in Wisconsin, this is really April. And then we have the late growing season burns, which is kind of that August through October. So this is a drone image of a fire that was done at the Pheasant Branch Conservancy last fall. And so you can see a lot of the plants are still green in this photo. And the effects of a late growing season burn are quite a bit different. And they've historically and not been very commonly used over the past few decades, though there is a lot of evidence that this was historically the time that Native Americans were using prescribed fire. So historically, this was the dominant season for fire, and our natural plant communities developed more under a late growing season fire regime. The threats to our remaining prairies include development, isolation, excessive browse by deer, tree and shrub encroachment, a lack of fire, and climate change. Ooh, out of order. So this is a picture of a pasque flower. I went to a local bluff prairie in the spring to go look for pasque flowers, and I found a few, but many of them had been eaten by deer, and this one had been just simply plucked and dropped. And a lot of our prairie plants, they'll survive repeated browsing like this, but over a long enough time, if this is preventing them from reproducing, the population will eventually dwindle and be lost. So especially in these isolated communities, excessive browse is a serious concern for loss of specific species such as pasque flower. This is a picture of a woolly milkweed, which I believe is listed as a threatened species in Wisconsin. So this occurs on in an isolated population on a bluff prairie. And if you can see, this plant produced flowers, but was never pollinated. So a lot of our native plant species have very specific pollination syndromes, or they're only pollinated by a single species of insect. And so as those interspecies connections get lost, it really has detrimental effects throughout ecosystems. And so in this case, if the plant species isn't able to match up with the insect that pollinates it, it's not ever going to be able to reproduce. And eventually these populations will just dwindle and be lost. Tree and shrub encroachment, this is a huge problem, especially with kind of introduction of invasive species and with lack of fire and neglect. A lot of our little remaining prairie remnants are just being lost. Lack of fire, this is one that, at least something is being done about. But again, we know that without fire, these prairies just disappear. And then development. So development comes with a lot of different issues. So there's the direct habitat loss. There's the fragmentation that occurs as habitats get broken up and individual remnants become isolated from each other. There's also issues with dogs and cats. So dogs have negative impacts on our grassland birds. We know this, even if it's not through direct predation, it's through disturbance. Cats, of course, are major predators of songbirds and a lot of other small animals. Excess nutrients, so all the nutrients that come off of people's septic sinks and off fertilizer off their lawn, it goes into the adjacent prairie and really just changes the nutrient dynamic and really promotes invasive species growth. Exotic plant species, so as people plant all kinds of exotic plant species in their yard, these things escape and become invasive species. So this is the story with multiflora rose and buckthorn and honeysuckle and everything else. And it also creates some issues with prescribed fire management. So as these prairies get surrounded, it really makes it more difficult to use fire and present some definite challenges, especially with smoke management. So trying to balance the need to burn these prairies and to not impact people's homes. One slide I left out was climate change. And that one that's a large issue, and I don't really know how much can be done about that. You know, some of like lack of fire can be pretty easily approached, as can tree and shrub encroachment, but some of these other issues are much larger and more complicated. With climate change, I think the biggest thing is, as our climate changes locally in Wisconsin and we move into a much wetter period, it is really going to make it more difficult to, I think, to manage our land with fire and to keep some of these isolated prairie remnants, especially the dry prairies and the bluff prairies, open, because they're not going to experience the drought that they had in the past. And I think that's a lot of what's really kept these small isolated prairies open. And I think that went faster than I was expecting. So if there are any questions, I will take them now.
Would you like to stop sharing,
Oh, yep.
Rob? And then I will take over. Okay. So again, well, thanks, Rob. Was great. It's really interesting stuff. And it's so scary to think that we've lost so much prairie, and now it's just the fight to keep what we have. Yeah. So right now we don't have any comments yet. It looks like, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about the value of native plantings in your own yard.
So that's a lot of how I got into this was through that. I started gardening at a pretty young age, and I worked when I was in college. I helped to maintain a native plant garden, and I think they're wonderful in that they can support an amazing amount of insect diversity in a very small place. And unfortunately, that's a whole nother issue, I think, and another topic is kind of our loss of insect diversity and abundance. Unfortunately, I don't really think that prairie plantings can solve a lot of these much broader issues because they're not really going to support the really rare and imperiled species, but they can definitely support um, a lot of native plant species, a lot of insects. They definitely, just taking your lawn out of watering and fertilizing it has huge implications for the surrounding area and in the watershed that you live in. And then also just such a joy and beauty that it brings. And I really think that uh, what was it? Leopold said something along the lines of people can only care about things that they know, right? So I think introducing and normalizing native plants and having them become common and having people know them, I think really can go a long way towards developing a sense of place within our ecosystem and within our natural communities, and really develop a sense of love and of stewardship for them. And if nothing else, they're a lot of fun. They're a great way to learn plants. They're a great way to just be marveled by all the small things that you'll see.
Absolutely. Somebody asks, following on from that, is there any specific literature you could recommend for how people can convert their lawns into prairies?
Oh,
Or
I'm
bits?
sure
Yeah.
there's a ton out there. I don't think it would take too much. Nothing comes to mind, but it's becoming more and more popular and more mainstream. There's also locally a number of for-profit companies that do that. So if nothing else, you can always call and consult some professionals on that.
Okay. And yeah, there's a wealth of websites out
Yeah, and
there. I know
there's
that.
people that know. Um, I think there's probably a lot of people within the Friends that have experience and have that knowledge and can talk to you about it and help put you kind of point you in the right direction.
Um, okay, so for those who may not be familiar with our Platinum Prairie plans for the Acker property,
Mhm.
can you explain why that type of prairie is so important?
So yeah, one thing that I had wanted to kind of get into was kind of restored prairies and some of the issues with that. What that essentially is going to do is try to better mimic what our historic prairies look like and get us kind of over this hurdle. So one thing that's happened is restored prairies haven't really had the full range of diversity and really the right composition to really resemble what historic prairies in Wisconsin look like. And one issue with that is it's led some to question how well then these kind of plant communities that we've created are really supporting our native wildlife resources. And so what this is going to be an attempt is to do the best possible job of putting down a high quality prairie planting with an emphasis on kind of providing the right structure for grassland birds and other wildlife.
Wow. It's 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 amazing, how everything is intertwined. And if you lose
Absolutely.
one part of the web, it just falls
Yeah.
apart.
And
Um,
I kind of focused on kind of the communities themselves and the plants. Um, my expertise really isn't in the insects and the animals, but it is important to remember that these are incredibly complex systems, and it's important that we think about all of these, because if we just have the plants but we're losing the insects and the animals, then I don't really think that we're meeting our conservation goals.
Okay, following on from that, and this goes to sort of once you've got the prairie, what do you have to do to actually get the prairie going? And then once you have it, how do you maintain it? But one of the participants is asking, in the new acre segment, she was interested in what was going to be planted there, and then also the management of it. Will pesticides be used to kill existing vegetation, fire? What other techniques are going to be used to get the acre property turned over into a mature prairie?
Mhm. So for the first year or two after seeding, they'll be mowed regularly to be kept short. And this is to prevent weeds from establishing and to make sure that there's enough sunlight reaching the seedlings. After that, there will be some targeted herbicide used to prevent invasive species from establishing and taking over. And then in the long term, it's really going to be about prescribed fire management, because that's, as I've said multiple times already, that is really the most important driver in preserving our prairies.
Okay. And here is a question. Somebody's wondering if you could speak just to the Pheasant Branch Conservancy. How are we doing with maintaining and managing that land, given all the risks that you've covered tonight?
So the Pheasant Branch Conservancy on a whole is doing really well. There is a lot of resources that go into that. So there's my position, there's over 4,000 hours of volunteers time that goes into that. We have Operation Fresh Start teams out there all the time. We have a summer intern program. So the management is awesome. I wish that more and more areas could be managed as intensely as Pheasant Branch is, and to be able to get all the attention that's needed. There are some hurdles, so they're kind of still dealing with a lot of some invasive species issues and some brush encroachment issues and some of the issues with kind of the restored prairies, trying to add diversity and kind of manage some of the structure of the prairie to hopefully kind of make it more diverse and more appealing to certain species of grassland birds. So one thing that we did 2 years ago was we started a propagation garden. So we started propagating certain prairie species to try to be able to introduce them to the Pheasant Branch Conservancy and to other areas. For instance, one thing that I mentioned earlier was a lot of our restored prairies don't really resemble or function like historic prairies. So the dominant grass in historic prairies was prairie dropseed, but it is almost never used in restored prairies. And so our dominant grasses now are like Indian grass and big blue stem, which rightfully have a place in the prairies, but at a much lesser density than what it is now. So we've kind of started trying to propagate some of those grasses and some of these other species that that are missing from our prairie from our restored prairies.
Okay. Someone is asking about fire management. Why is it so beneficial, and what happens with fire that doesn't happen with mowing?
So a lot of things. So mowing and fire, they have some similarities, and in some ways they both mimic the grazing of large-bodied herbivores. The biggest difference is that mowing is a mechanical reaction and fire is a chemical reaction. So one thing, again, that they both have in common is they kind of remove the above ground material. Fire, though, actually removes the thatch. It really does a better job of actually killing woody plants that that would otherwise take over and kind of remove prairies. It volatilizes nutrients, especially nitrogen, which is hugely important because one of the reasons that prairies tend to be so diverse is because fire is going through and it's removing nitrogen, which is the most important nutrient in plant growth. And in prairies, really everyone should be, all the species of plants should be equally poor. And that prevents like any one species from forming a monopoly and taking over. So in this case, that's what fire really does, is it kind of keeps everybody, it promotes, what does it promote? It promotes more generally equality with amongst the species. And it does a lot of other things like that. It stimulates plants to produce seed and a lot of other things. What we do know is that in the absence of fire, a lot of species are lost, and eventually prairies just decline in time.
Okay. What about volunteering opportunities for restoration work at the Conservancy right now? Is that possible? Do you need help in different areas? Maybe you'd like people to help with the propagation garden, or you need people helping on other kinds of crews?
Yeah, so in the time of COVID, our volunteer program has been a little bit different. We've had to limit the number of volunteers that we allow during our volunteer events, and we've kind of limited it more to people on the Pheasant Branch Board and the Restoration and Management Committee. Hopefully that will change, and then going forward, we'll be doing a lot of seed collection. This last summer, we really stepped up our seed collection and went from once a month to bi-weekly. And that in part is to really be able to provide hyper-local the genotype for the new acre acquisition, especially with a lot of the wetland species that we've collected. And we definitely need help with the propagation garden. We're hoping to get about 12 people that might be that would sign up and be willing to work in small groups, maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So if you're interested in that, you can look me up and send me an email and we'll be in contact. And there's some other programs that we're hoping to develop to keep people active and involved in different ways.
So to look you up, that's restoration@pheasantbranch.org. Is that?
That would go to me eventually, yep.
Okay, great. Well, that seems to be all the questions we have for tonight. Is there anything else you've thought of that you might want to touch on, or?
I could probably talk for hours if you kept picking my brain, but
how much prairie? What's like the prairie management in Dane County, like on county land versus other public lands, private lands? Do you have any numbers?
I don't, and that's something that I've really wondered about, because there are a lot of groups that are doing quite a bit, and there's a lot of private land that I work on in kind of my other career, and it is always surprising to me how many people have devoted so much time, money, and effort to managing prairies. And there are some fairly large prairies out there on private land that you would not otherwise know about. So there's quite a lot. Unfortunately, I think what's missing is there's a lot of groups that are working on prairies and conservation in general, but they're not necessarily talking to each other, and we're not all kind of moving towards any one goal. There's a lot of people off kind of doing their own thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to for working more closely together and for creating kind of a larger vision for conservation in Dane County and in a larger scale as well.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a great community organizer position or a grad student. I know when I was in grad school, some of my colleagues would have loved putting together something like that. But
One thing I've thought would be really interesting is just to look at a map of where conservation is happening. If you were somehow able to contact all these different groups, you have like Groundswell, you have Dane County, they're huge, the Prairie Enthusiast, and then also all the private landowners that are working on their own land to really see what it all looks like at a big picture.
we have some more comments here. Somebody said they just found a reference to something called the Native Plant Herald, and that can be found all at one word, nativeplantherald.prairienursery.com, that has ideas for lawn prairies. What I can do for folks is some of the references we're making and some of the things we've talked about, I'm gonna go through and I will add those in comments eventually on our YouTube channel, and I'll post them on our Facebook page so people know about them. So if people want to come back and double check any of this information without having to watch the whole video again, I'm gonna try to supply it to folks. Another comment or another thing, do you want to mention the opportunity for people to purchase plants for the propagation garden right now? That's another.
Oh, yes. That is one thing. So there's a wonderful program called Plant Dane, which provides plants to local or native plants to local community groups. So you can look them up through their website, Plant Dane. One of the groups that you can contribute to is the Pheasant Branch Conservancy. So you can donate to get more plants to expand our propagation garden. I would encourage you to go and help us with that, and also just look at the program, because again, I really do think that it's an awesome program, and it's a means to help a lot of local schools and getting in native plantings and rain gardens. So definitely a program we're supporting.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that it's a fantastic program. I've been managing the sixth graders at Cromery Middle School for the last 3 years as they've been restoring the rain gardens there that were installed, but there was never a plan to maintain them. And these kids are getting out there providing hundreds of man hours each year to trying to get the more aggressive and non-native plants out. And we've received plants from the Plant Dane program. It's fantastic. For Pheasant Branch, I know we've got mentions of it on our website. And so I think you can click through there to get to it, or you can go through Plant Dane and you can manage to find ways to donate specifically to Pheasant Branch Conservancy. Yep. I think that's all of the questions we have and comments. This has been a great presentation again, and we thank you, except for all of my technical problems.
I hadn't done a PowerPoint presentation in over 10 years, so.
Yeah, well,
rusty.
It's okay. I know we're taking you out of your element because I've seen you in the field, and you are amazing.
Thank you.
So we really appreciate you trying this out. And
it's a new venue for me.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have many more years of being in the field. Not that you're terrible at this, but just because I know that's what you prefer to do.
I think I'm better in the field. I feel more comfortable and in my prime. Contemporaneous kind of education than formal slideshows.
But you're clearly, you know, thoughtful, and and you have such a depth of knowledge. So
Thank you.
we appreciate your time. I'd like to thank everybody else for joining us, putting up with my technical difficulties. And we're grateful to have you here. We hope that you will come to more of our Conservancy days. If you want to be on the mailing list for those, email me or the office, either office@pheasantbranch.org or education@pheasantbranch.org, and we'll get you onto the email list so you'll get monthly announcements of what is coming up. If you have ideas for what we could do for our Conservancy Day program, we would love to hear it. We're trying to make these we make these relevant to what's happening now in our world and what's happening in the Conservancy. And we would really like to hear what folks would like to learn about. And hopefully we will be able to be outside together this summer. So I encourage you to come to one of our walking, moving Conservancy days where we can socially distance and explore the Conservancy together. Many people are saying thank you very much. And I'm going to say thank you again. And with that, I guess we'll sign off. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.